Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2012's Analogue, A Hate Story, the visual novel that tasks you with retrieving the logs of a long derelict spaceship with the help of one of 2 AIs, neither of which seem to be telling the whole story.
Following that is the racing game that introduced the world to Mode 7 on the Super Nintendo, as Captain Falcon reinvigorated the genre with his hovercraft's sense of 3D. 1990's F-Zero. What a challenge to try to put 2 games together and come up with a theme here in the new year in 2024. Happy New Year. But you know what? The word mute works pretty well between a character in one game and a track in another. Mute.
Can't think of anything else, honestly.
What a way to start indeed then. But let's start by looking back quickly. We came out with our Best of 2023 episode last week. Apologies for the delay on that one. The way the holidays fell this year made working on it extra difficult, and those are always a beast to pull together. But we have a couple thoughts on it after the fact.
Such as the fact that granted, I only said the title of this game like twice, maybe, but it's not called Armored Core 6 Shadows of Rubicon. It's Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. Literally the opposite thing. And I don't know. I was even writing it like as Shadows of Rubicon on the outline. So somehow, for some reason, I convinced myself that's what the game was called and only realized while listening through the episode myself after it came out.
Meanwhile, I did not write the DLC down for the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet game, and whatever fell out of my mouth was a jumble of mess instead of the hidden treasure of Area Zero, the Indigo Disc. So, we rounded out 2023 in pure form, and we start the new year here. But Christmas has come and gone. Joe, what was your gaming haul?
So my family has stopped asking me what I want for Christmas. I get money. They just give me cash so I can buy my own thing. And honestly, in terms of buying stuff, it's mostly just been stuff on the Steam sale. Because Steam Deck, why not? I bought a couple of visual novels that are supposed to be highly critically regarded. I bought a horror game called The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow, which I have not started yet, but I've heard it's very good. And I bought Signalis, so I'm going to play that soon as well.
Interesting. I did not end up with a Steam Deck. I basically ended up with like a full wardrobe, and that's totally okay. That's what being an adult is all about. But
that's how I get all my clothes, because I never have to buy clothes, so my mother takes it upon herself.
I mean, win-win, right? So I did get a couple games though, and I got Alan Wake 2 and Super Mario Brothers Wonder. So that's what I find myself playing as of late, is starting Alan Wake 2. And I have gone through Coffee World, and I'm just about to get to We Sing. So, we're hitting prime stuff with that game. Big Resident Evil 2 remake vibes, which I feel like all survival horror games at this point kind of have to take notes from. But in case you're thinking of how that's going to go about, and I did only go and watch Sam Lake talk for 15 minutes about what you need to know about Alan Wake going into the game, and it's pretty good actually. Did a good job with kind of catching up, and I've been able to follow along pretty well. So kudos to that. Really enjoying it so far, but there are some environments that you kind of get lost in, you get turned around, you got to backtrack some. So I have had to look up a guide a couple times just to make sure that I'm going forward and doing the right thing not doing a full 100% completion. They have, spots all over. It's like you can find little upgrade points here if you want. I'm like, I just want the story. Story mode is fine for me. Thanks.
Well, I have been playing 2 games. One, I've been playing for a review, allegedly, even though it came out on Halloween, which is called Little Goody Two Shoes, which is an indie game that was published by Square, and then they just didn't talk about it because that's how Square does things now, I guess. Or I've seen some people say they did get advertising for it, but I never saw anything for it. But it is a horror game that is very, very closely inspired by like old RPG Maker horror. And in fact, I believe made by a team that made one of the more iconic RPG Maker horror games there are, but I don't know that for sure. But it's a fairy tale, basically. You play as a girl named Elise in a small, seemingly, I think, German, like, village. She's a terrible person. But everybody around her treats her like she's not a terrible person, and she doesn't seem to realize she's a terrible person. And it takes a lot of cues from, like, it's this really weird mixture of, like, old Disney movies and then, like, 80s anime sort of mashed together. It's absolutely bizarre. And I also played Cocoon.
Oh, good. How was that?
It's pretty good. I played it basically in one sitting. I had to stop at one point to go do something, but then I came back like an hour later. Very intuitive. I never had a point where I ended up feeling like I had to go look up what to do. And at the same time, I never really felt like I was just cruising through the game. I think it strikes a very good balance in terms of difficulty curve when it comes to the puzzles. I think the puzzles are interesting and give a lot of very good eureka moments. There's one bit that I'm not a huge fan of, but otherwise, yeah, pretty solid game.
So when is Sea of Stars? Because I have my fiance going and trying to push toward maybe doing the true ending. So we've had a lot of Sea of Stars in the house.
Thirsty Suitors, I think, is on my list first. But then I believe I have Sea of Stars next on the list after that. I need to put together my resolutions list, which Sea of Stars is probably going to be on there at the very least. So,
I should figure that out myself as well.
All right. Let's talk about not games that came out recently, but games that came out over a decade ago. I genuinely forgot this game was that old. Let's talk about Analogue: A Hate Story, which was originally released for PC on February 1st, 2012. It was developed by Love Conquers All Games, which is the name that is used for projects by developer Christine Love, and in a lot of cases, this one included, the artist Raid. Christine Love is a fairly prominent indie dev. She does a lot of like visual novels and LGBT stuff. This is the only game of hers I've played to like a credit roll. And I'm going to be fully upfront. I don't remember a ton about it because I played it in 2012, maybe 2013. Either way, it was over a decade ago. She has one of my favorite things on Twitter I'd ever seen. I don't think she goes on Twitter anymore because of, the stuff. But she used to have a thread while she was making her last game that came out, where every time Unity crashed, she posted a picture of a manga panel of a girl like slapping a desk in anger that just had the caption, "That makes me hit the desk." And that thread was like 50 pictures long. And eventually started getting really unhinged. It's one of my favorite things that Twitter's ever been used for. Christine Love is cool, and she does good stuff. And this is the first time I had heard of her was through Analogue: A Hate Story. So what is Analogue? It is a visual novel, and I will give fair warning to anybody who this interests and wants to play it. It is a very heavy visual novel. The art style would not make you think it is as heavy as it is. In my opinion, that's probably on purpose. But yeah, it gets into some real, like, subject matters of things like abuse and stuff like that. So be aware of that. In terms of the plot, which I figure I should talk about first before the controls, as usual, I think the best way to sort of start it is the note that the player character gets at the start of the game, which describes how they get to where they are. It says, quote, "Hey, guess what? I've got a job that you're gonna love. Nice and easy. This is strictly a salvage mission. No crazy shit, I promise. One of those old pre-FTL generation ships from the 2000s, the Mugungwa, however the hell you pronounce that, just popped up on my radar. Its disappearance was apparently some big unsolved mystery. Never made it to its destination, I guess. It's just drifting lifelessly in orbit of Antares B. I'll tell you the exact coordinates. It's pretty hard to get a visual on, probably why nobody found it before. Sponsor for this one is the Historical Society from the Outer Colonies. Here's what the objective card says. Download any log files you can, especially any that can explain what happened to the ship. If possible, speak to the security AI Mute for assistance. It's a good, easy gig, and I want you to take this one. It should be asocial enough for you. I don't want to hear any complaints." And so that's basically what you do. You go to this derelict ship, and you begin poking around in its computer systems looking for the log files you need. And this is pretty much done through a computer interface. Playing this game involves, like, clicking things and actually typing commands in sometimes, making it a little more interactive than your average visual novel. That is not a slight against visual novels, it's just usually they are just read and click. So this adds a separate step to that. And while digging through the systems, the player encounters 2 AI. The first is a cheerful and curious young woman named Hyune. The second is Mute, the Mugungwa's security AI, as mentioned in the opening note. And you can only have one of them active at a time, meaning you gotta choose which one you are going to hang out with. And the player can only really interact with the AIs through either yes or no prompts that they will provide as they go on, or by showing them the logs that you find to get their take on what is written within. The AIs will also help point you towards specific logs, though each one points towards different ones with different subjects because it kind of feels like both of them have their own agenda, or they only know part of the story and they're going to point to the part they know. And through these logs, the player begins to learn about the culture aboard the Mugungwa, which had for some reason devolved to a deeply patriarchal and misogynistic society, based on Korea's historical Joseon dynasty. And they also follow the stories of a few families, namely the Kims, the Ryus, and the Smiths, and more specifically, a young girl referred to only as the Pale Bride. So the questions are, can you figure out what happened to the residents of the Mugungwa? Who is Hyune? And why does she hate Mute so much? And conversely, why does Mute hate her so much? And can the logs within the ship's files shed light on these mysteries and more? I hope I'm doing a good job getting across what this game is. For some reason, I was super worried when I typed this, but I think I did pretty fine. So here's where I will ask, what are our experiences with Analogue: A Hate Story?
I think you did a pretty okay job considering I'm following along, and I have never heard of this game before. I don't know if that speaks to my unawareness of indie games kind of from this time period or what, or maybe just not playing as many visual novels. But yeah, this is new to me, and interesting to start the year with this game.
I don't remember how I heard of this game, because this is not one, I'm sure it's been on at some point in its life, but I know for a fact this is not one of those, oh, it was in a Humble Bundle, and that's how I got it, which is how I can say I heard of a lot of indie games back in that time. I have not replayed it since 2013. I actually wanted to replay it before this episode, but then, Christmas and all that got in the way of doing that. I'm probably going to replay it after this, though, because not only do I want to refresh myself on what this game is, but also a sequel came out the next year, which I bought on launch and have never loaded up. So kind of want to do that too. I think the thing that worried me the most about bringing this game to the show is that, obviously it has a lot of like basis in, Korean, which I should note, Christine Love herself is not Korean. She's Canadian, but she did a ton of research, as we will get into like Korean history and such in order to write this story. And Korean's different to pronounce. So like Japanese, I have no problem pronouncing. I've been listening to people speak Japanese since I was like early teenager. That I can pronounce almost flawlessly. I'm not going to say flawlessly because I don't know, but but Korean isn't as simple. And so I had to go and look up how to say a bunch of stuff, which is harder than you'd think because AI generated pronunciation bots and videos have made looking up how to pronounce anything in any language a complete pain in the ass.
Oh, absolutely.
So hopefully I found the correct translations, though one of them came from actually kind of maybe the most stereotypical possible place an American could find pronunciation notes for Korean, which was somebody on Reddit says that it is pronounced Mugungwa, and that's the best resource I could find. I'm going to give you one guess what the subreddit was for that this was posted on.
League of Legends.
No. Squid Game.
Oh, okay, sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. The most stereotypical possible, probably the first time some Americans have ever heard people speak Korean. Ever. Though I did, after that, look up that Mugungwa is the Korean name for the Hibiscus syriacus, or the Korean rose, which is the national flower of South Korea. Analogue itself is actually a follow-up to a previous project by Christine Love called Digital: A Love Story. I have never personally played that one. Maybe I should, I don't know. As far as I'm aware, it is not required reading for Analogue. Analogue takes place hundreds of years later, centuries later. So I think from what I gather, reading into like a brief plot summary, Digital is basically just about why there are AI. That's basically it. So it doesn't really matter. You can play Analogue without playing Digital. So when looking into this, I did find a couple of interviews, and some of this is also just from the Wikipedia article because that's just the best jumping off point in my experience. I did read that Love chose the Joseon dynasty particularly because it had kind of fascinated her overall, but from the sound of it, it was kind of a morbid curiosity because it was, as said before, a very, very, very patriarchal society and time in Korean history, where women were basically like second-class citizens all the way. They were objects for men to like use and stuff like that. They existed to be wives. That was what they were. And a quote directly off of Wikipedia about it from Love being, "The plot is moved mostly by the pale bride, the modern girl who can't understand what's going on. But the crux of it really was trying to get into the heads of everyone else. The men and women who have internalized all these awful misogynist ideals and take them completely for granted as the way things are. So the story really just formed itself around that question. What would it be like to be a woman in that society? History didn't care about the answer, but I do. The rest, the modern thinking woman who can't possibly survive, the women who are forced to navigate family politics, the men who are complicit in this whole system but can't just be dismissed as bad people, all came naturally in that attempt to answer it." And so, in terms of like character writing and stuff, She says, Hyun A went essentially unchanged in terms of her place in the story, just in general. But Love does talk about how Mute's place and personality kind of had to develop as she wrote. And because Mute acts like more of a, I guess the way I would describe it is this. Hyun is from our time, essentially. She is from a South Korea that is not this, that is modern and doesn't really, do the whole patriarchy thing. I can't say that for sure. As much, at least. I don't know. I am not an expert on Korean culture. And I will never claim to be. But, it's a modern, kind of more liberal society in general. And she is, juxtaposed against this extremely old-fashioned, harmful, misogynist society in general. But Mute is a lot more reflective of that society. And so because she was more inclined towards the thought processes and the culture of the other passengers of the Mugunghwa, Love says that she actually started to hate her as time went on, as she was writing her. But then as her story and character evolved, that hate kind of turned into sympathy. She says she warmed up to Mute after a while, because it kind of turned into the narrative of, oh, she's only like that because, that's how she needs to be in order to survive here. And that's not necessarily her fault, etc., that kind of thing. There is an interview that a lot of this information comes from that wasn't necessarily about Analogue or about the sequel, but was just basically them talking about some of the themes. This interview was done by Patricia Hernandez over on Kotaku. And a couple quotes that I like that I pulled out, one of them being, quote, during development, she would often remark on the necessity of being drunk, which is not uncommon for a writer, to be sure, but you don't often hear about authors who have difficulty writing because the subject is just that reprehensible and disgusting. One of the biggest challenges for Love was the need to put herself in the headspace of the people that were propping up this culture and way of life, which sucked, and hence why she needed to be drunk. But she also found this to be wholly necessary, even if awful, and she at least had some sort of interest in it. And she does say that some of her fascination in this time period is not negative, but from what I gather, most of it is. Another quote that I liked from Love is, quote, I'm kind of interested in how those ideas take root, both in people and also in society. Nobody ever wakes up one day and says, yeah, I hate women. I wish we'd stop letting them read. I really like that quote a lot. But yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the people that do apparently wake up and say that. I'm not one of them, but I genuinely cannot imagine putting myself in the headspace of somebody like that. And I think it's rather impressive that she was able to do so and not lose her mind.
Well, there's a movement of voices online today that, at least in the United States, are propping up ideas that think women should no longer be allowed to vote. So maybe it starts from places like that. Just push that out there. Of course, reprehensible and disgusting and awful, but those thoughts are out there still to this day.
Fun fact, that's what the interview was about.
Mm-hmm.
The interview was about how maybe some of the themes in Analogue mirror just a few too many things that's happening in places like America right now with some of the people in charge.
Was it a recent interview, or was it back during a time when...
No, it was in 2013.
Yeah, so when Gamergate was taking root.
Oh, yeah, probably. That was probably well underway. It's kind of depressing that things only,
got worse.
Seem to have gotten a little bit more dire since then. Just a tad. But that is neither here nor there. Analogue reviewed overall well, though not like perfectly. It's at a 62 on Metacritic. Only 5 reviews though, which I'm kind of surprised about because this is a fairly, I don't want to say influential, but it's a fairly well-known sort of indie game of the time. Like not super mainstream, but it was talked about a good amount by certain circles. But it still found its audience, and at least by August of 2013, it had sold over 40,000 copies on Steam alone. And the game was pretty much overall praised for Love's writing. I did not see a lot of complaints about the writing of the game in general. It was one of 36 finalists for Indiecade 2012, alongside titles such as, and I genuinely am baffled to know that these all came out in the same year, Botanicula, Cart Life, FTL Faster Than Light, Gorogoa, Guacamelee, and The Stanley Parable. That's just some of them. And as far as I could tell, though, unfortunately, it did not manage to take home any of the awards. But it was one of the finalists, and that's impressive in its own right. There was originally going to be a DLC edition, but in the fashion that we see a lot in indie games, I feel like, I mean, with a fairly high-profile example right now, it ballooned in scope so much that it ceased to be DLC and just became a full-on sequel. It's called Hate Plus. It released in 2013, and a quote from another interview with Love says, quote, Analogue was 60,000 words. Hate Plus was designed to be downloadable content about 2/3 the length. It's now 100,000 words.
Where's that Katana Zero DLC?
Where's Silk Song?
Oh, sure, yeah, that too.
So Hate Plus follows the player's return to Earth alongside whichever AI managed to join them at the end of Analogue. You can actually import your save file from Analogue, so it follows through from what ending you got. And it focuses on finding out what actually happened to cause society aboard the Mugungwa to degrade to what it became, because the story that you find in Analogue is more focused on, hey, how did all these people die? And not so much, hey, how did society get to this state? So I have not played Hate Plus. Again, I've had it in my Steam library since it came out, and it's probably about time I get to that, considering we are entering its 11th year of life. And from there, Love's next major project was an erotic visual novel called Lady Killer in a Bind, which some people might have heard of. That came out in 2016. And then her most recent release was an RPG called Get in the Car, Loser, that came out in 2021, which was heavily inspired based on her tweets. That's the one that she made in Unity that was the That Makes Me Hit the Desk source. Very heavily inspired by FF13, I guess. I have not played it despite also owning that one. And I own Lady Killer in a Bind. I've at least played a little bit of that one. The point is, I own a lot of Christian Love games, and like most games in my Steam library, I buy them and then forget them. So, the music in Analogue was done by a composer by the name of Isaac Schankler. Isaac Schankler is a composer, accordionist, and electronic musician who is currently based in Los Angeles. They do a lot of music writing, like writing about music, not writing music, though they do write music, obviously, or else we probably wouldn't be talking about them here. And according to their website, they won the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award for Excellence in Music Journalism in 2013. A quote from their website is, quote, my focus is on creating a unique sound world for each game that intensifies and illuminates the emotional states conveyed by the gameplay and narrative. They currently teach as an associate professor of music at Cal Poly Pomona in Los Angeles. They teach composition, music technology, and music theory. You can follow them on Twitter at Pisaac? I'm gonna hope that's how it's pronounced. Pisaac. You can also buy the Analogue soundtrack as well as other soundtracks that they have worked on at isaacschankler.bandcamp.com. And you can find recordings and some sheet music of their non-game compositions on their website at isaacschankler.com. And that discography is pretty much a lot of Christine Love stuff. They did the music for Analogue Hate Story. They also came back to do the music for Hate Plus, and they did the music for Lady Killer in a Bind. But 2 other games they listed. One I have heard of, one I have not. I have not heard of Red Shirt. I can assume what it is, though, based on pop culture context clues. And they did the music for Depression Quest, which is a game I have heard of, but have not played. And that appears to be it. At least that's all their website and Bandcamp list. So they don't seem to have worked in games for a while. It might be they're focusing on their teaching career. I don't know. I could not find a lot of information about them in general. Which means it is time to jump into the Critical 5 for Analogue, A Hate Story. And I will, again, be upfront. It's been a decade since I played this game. I do not know exactly the context where pretty much any of these songs play, though some of them can be guessed fairly easily based on the title. And the first that you can guess pretty fast is critical track number 1. This is Hyane, Innocence. This is my personal favorite version of Hyane's theme. There's only I think 3 of them, but this is the main one and the best version. I think I like it a lot because most of my time when I played, I did not get all the endings because I was a stupid teenager who didn't understand that you should go back and sometimes do endings when the game is only 2 hours long. I don't know what I was doing, but most of my time was spent with Hyane, so I remember some of her personality is that she's very, cheerful and she's optimistic despite some of the terrible things that you're reading about. And I think this song does a very, very good job of bringing across that sort of personality. It feels sort of hopeful and it feels curious. And I don't know, it overall just feels happy despite what sounds like was a very bad situation.
I'm not really sure what instruments I expected to be in this soundtrack, or at least to represent Hyane. But I do get the sense of an AI presence, so there's that. But some of the piano, or at least electronic piano synths here, and then the different Asian-inspired instruments. For as much as we talk about instruments, when some of those pop up, you think I'd know them better. But pleasant surprises to be sure, but just kind of a bouncy, cloud-like, almost whimsy here. And, if the track is going to be titled Innocence, I think that represents it well. Though I'm sure the themes go to darker places depending on what happens.
Yeah, and we'll talk about one version of that later on. But yeah, I do think that this soundtrack does a very good job of it. Still sounds sci-fi-ish, at least, while also incorporating instruments from East Asia, and it works really well. They're very well implemented. Critical track number 2. Let's talk about the other AI's theme. This is Mute Mischief. So I'm going to be quite honest. Like I said, when I played the game, I spent pretty much all of my time with Hyunei. So I don't actually know a lot about Mute. Again, I wanted to replay before this episode, but I never got around to it. Most of my time may have been spent with Hyunei, but I think I remember hearing this theme. And also, I think that Mute kind of has the better theme between the two. I like this song a lot, even though it sounds... I don't know what makes me say this, but this song sounds a lot more visual novel to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, it's a little simpler, and kind of more of the instruments that you'd expect, I suppose, in a visual novel. We're not getting necessarily some of the more unique instruments there, but we're still getting, plucked strings and a little plump, 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 like little plodding melody. I agree with you there. Like, it does sound more belonging to a visual novel.
I do think it does a good job of it. It does incorporate a little bit more instrumentation that you would associate with East Asia, just a little bit. The string instrument, I could not tell you what it is. I want to say a sitar, but I think that's probably wrong.
It's in that family, at least.
But I do like how there's a bigger emphasis on those, because Mute is, as far as I'm aware, more traditional and more of the society that sort of formed her.
Oh, sure.
That is the assumption I would make. I really got to replay this game. I got to get to know Mute more than not at all. Critical track number 3 is a bit of a weird one, but as far as I remember, this is what you're going to hear for a good chunk of the game. Maybe not a huge chunk of it, but like, it's very good at building the atmosphere you would expect from a game like this. This is Terminal Calm. This song is pretty much almost entirely just this airy ambiance that really, I think, brings across the fact that you are floating in space next to a dead spaceship. Like a dead, huge spaceship. But there's also, like, the sounds of what seem to be electronic machinery going on around you. And I do also like how, for a good amount of it, you can hear yourself breathing, or at least that's what I assume that is supposed to be. But meanwhile, if you listen into the background, very quietly and subtly, you can still hear some chimes and some more of those other instruments from like that region of the world to sort of keep with that theming. And I think it does a very, very good job at building the atmosphere in that way. I think this plays when you don't have any AIs active or aren't like actively interacting with one. That would make sense to me, at least. And I think I remember that, but again, I don't 100% remember, but that's what I would assume.
For an atmospheric piece, I think it does do a really interesting job of mixing in all these elements at play that you've mentioned, especially, the monitor technology sounds really jump out from the get-go, and it almost kind of makes you think of another game where like you're at a terminal and that'd be Her Story, and you kind of get the sense of that. It's a good one, and I think for what this piece is trying to accomplish as atmosphere without directly engaging with any characters, it gives a good sense of white noise in a sense, a good background piece, but really giving you the flavor and the immersion that it's trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm pretty sure I know where critical track number 4 plays, not only because the Wikipedia article mentions it a couple of times, but also because I remember this moment once my memory had gotten jogged. Critical track number 4 is The Reactor. the most part, Analogue is kind of I want to say laid back, but that feels weird about a game where you're reading about some pretty terrible stuff. But that's generally what it is. You're just reading and you're talking to the AIs, and it's fairly not tense. And then the reactor of the ship starts getting ready to melt down, and you have 20 minutes to stop it, which you have to do by like going into the console and actively changing things about how the ship is working. And for anybody that is thinking about playing this game after this episode, this is the point of no return. Whichever AI you have out during this meltdown sequence, that is the one who you're ending with. You cannot switch after this. So be careful about that. But as a result, unlike the rest of the songs, which are either like sort of optimistic or carefree or just ambiance like the last track, this is a tense track. It's panicked. You're gonna die if you don't stop the reactor right now. And I think it does a very good job at that. It's also just some nice variety on the soundtrack in general when you're just listening through that.
Is it 20 minutes in real game player time?
I think so.
Okay. Because then if it is, that kind of makes sense why you'd think for what the narrative is calling for. You've heard plenty of tracks before from other games be much more intense and much more, higher stakes essentially. But if you're going to be listening to a track like this for up to 20 minutes, you can't have the anxiety ratchet up so much for so long. And so I think this strikes a good balance there of like, it's more tense than a lot of the other pieces we've heard so far, but it doesn't put you to the intensity of, say, like Skyward Sword when you have like the silent guardians. You're like you're not being bombarded like that. Let's put it that way.
Because that over the course of 20 minutes sounds exhausting.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so my point exactly.
And critical track number 5, fairly easy to figure out where this plays, because it is called Epilogue. I really kind of don't know what all to say about this track other than it does have a sense of finality to it. As long as you did so, at the end of the game, you do have an option to download whichever AI you currently have active and bring them onto the ship with you and leave alongside the logs that you downloaded as well, which is one of the endings I got with Hyunei a long time ago. And I think this works really well as just all right, that chapter's done. Especially when you think about hearing this and not realizing that there is a sequel coming in like a year.
So this is interesting because I just kind of got teleported with the vibes of this track to make me think of Shinji Hosoe's work in the Zero Escape franchise. Not necessarily for a piece that plays during an epilogue, but like the feeling of the soundtrack. So I think for me and the visual novels I've played, this is the most visual novel-like of them all. And I really resonate with this one. I like it a lot.
So for tracks on the cutting room floor, I have 2. The first is, so 2 of the families in the game have their own themes. For some reason, the Kims don't have their own theme, even though if I remember correctly, they're one of the more central ones. They are the family that, for a large portion, the Pale Bride interacts with the most. And they don't get one. But the Ryus and the Smiths do, and I think the best between the two is the first track in the cutting room floor being the Smiths. if you're wondering, no, I didn't have to go look up how to pronounce the Smiths. So there's that at least. I'm not that far gone. I don't know. I like this song because it sounds like weirdly casual. I don't know how else to describe it.
It sounds weirdly Ace Attorney.
Yeah, a little bit. It feels kind of out of place, which I guess fits for a family on a Korean ship named the Smiths. I don't know if that's a name that could be common over in South Korea. Maybe it is. I really genuinely don't know. But from an American point of view, as an ignorant idiot who doesn't know anything, they do certainly stand out in terms of names. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why I like that this song is so different compared to everything else on the soundtrack.
Yeah, with the Asian-inspired string instruments kind of counterpointed against like a walking bass. It's definitely a juxtaposition there that makes you think. It has a good vibe to it, but yeah, I think you pointed out that well.
And the other, we talked about how there are multiple versions of the AI's themes, and I want to highlight another one being Hyune Damage. Oops, you've learned something bad. Oops. That's probably something you could say about a lot of your time with this game. I like this version in particular because not only does it do a good job of still sort of bringing across Hyune's general personality, but I think the best touch that I can think of is, if you remember the clip from the Innocence version of the song, there was this very sort of optimistic and cheerful melody, and that is absent in this version completely. It is gone. You can hear the parts that would have led up to it, but overall, the rest of it is just not present, and for a song titled Damage, that's very fitting and very well done, I think, personally.
Completely. It's despondent and full of despair, and so it's, regardless of it being played at a point where you're learning the bad things, it's good to hear a counterpoint for this character theme.
So what will I never forget about Analogue, A Hate Story? I really have to replay this game as an adult, not only because I don't remember a ton of it, but also because I feel like, as a 31-year-old, I would probably have a lot more appreciation for the writing and such than I did at 19. I feel like that's not really a stretch to say about a lot of things in the world, honestly, but this, I think, is the most relevant one right now. Really got to replay it. Really kind of want to learn more about Mute's whole deal. And really want to see if what I remember about Hyune is accurate. Also, it's pretty cool that now I know how to pronounce her name, I hope. Again, there's this, general sense of, I don't know for sure, because, again, looking up how to pronounce words in other languages now, Asian languages especially, is just so hard now, because as with most things, AI has ruined everything. So, I gotta do that, and I gotta play Hate Plus, and I think maybe by the time we talk next, I will have done both. I don't know. We'll have to see. So for our transition, we usually like to highlight a fan remix, a fan cover of a song on the soundtrack. I fully expected this to be one of those times where I just pick another song off the soundtrack because I couldn't find any fan covers or fan remixes. But then there is one. There is one. And I think it's from a channel we have used before as transition. At least the name seems familiar. It is Ferdk, Ferdk.
Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. Sure.
They did a cover of Mute's theme, a rock guitar cover specifically. I genuinely am super pleasantly surprised I found something. I hesitate to use the word found because it was the first result on YouTube. It was also the only result on YouTube. And I'm pleasantly surprised that it exists. So please enjoy that, and we will be right back.
At the end of our last episode for Best of 2023, I said, I was going to cover this certain artist. That didn't happen. Literally had to pivot today and be like, if I'm going to make this recording, I got to pivot. So let's talk about a game that was planned for an episode that was in 2023. I think it was going to be paired with Deus Ex.
Yes, I think so.
Let's talk about F-Zero. F-Zero is not the first time that we've brought the franchise up on this show. On episode 116, we talked about F-Zero GX.
You know, I should go revisit that episode now that I have actually played F-Zero GX.
It might be interesting for you after your time on Smasher Pieces there. That's for sure. But I feel like it's fitting to bring up the original F-Zero with things that happened in 2023. And the original F-Zero released November 21st, 1990 on Super Famicom in Japan. It released August 23rd, 1991 on Super Nintendo in North America and 1992 in Europe. Always fun when you just get that year, no specific date. But F-Zero was a launch game for the platform, and it was a launch game on Super Famicom alongside Super Mario World in Japan. It was then interesting to compare how the launch lineups differed throughout the years then following for the different regions. So aside from Super Mario World and F-Zero, additional launch games for North America included Pilot Wings, SimCity, and Gradius 3. And for Europe, there was Super R-Type. I don't know, that's a space shooter game, apparently. Super Soccer, and Super Tennis.
Had you never heard of R-Type?
I it sounded familiar, but I didn't think space shooter.
The title, I think I knew. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen gameplay of it, but I think I knew it was a side-scrolling shooter. I could not point. Most of the space side-scrolling shooters from that time look exactly the same, so I could not point it out in our lineup, but I think I knew it was one.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Everything Super on Super Nintendo. F-Zero released for Virtual Console on Wii in 2006 and on Wii U in 2013, but you can play it today on Nintendo Switch Online through the Super Nintendo Library of Games. It was developed by Nintendo EAD and published by Nintendo. What is F-Zero? Well, it's a racing game with the camera behind the car. And I know that sounds like pretty, well, yeah, duh. But the thing is, F-Zero was actually really influential for the genre, come to think of it. Because of this positioning, it gives the player a more realistic sense of emulating what would be a third dimension into the screen, especially when you consider what was possible with the technology at the time. Each machine, each hovercraft in F-Zero has a power meter, which serves as a measurement of the machine's durability, and it decreases when the machine collides with landmines, the side of the track, or another vehicle. Energy can be replenished by driving over pit areas that are placed along the home straight or nearby. Those are the purple lines. Especially if you play Mario Kart 8 and you have those F-Zero tracks, you know exactly what you're referring to. Like, they replenishes the coins. It's like that. So a race in F-Zero consists of 5 laps around the track. And I didn't see enough gameplay or have played enough F-Zero to know this, but the description on Wikipedia says, the player must complete each lap in a successively higher place to avoid disqualification from the race. I don't know if that's true.
That sounds like it might be talking about F-Zero 99.
I mean, I wonder if F-Zero 99 gets it from F-Zero.
I've never heard of that being a part. Granted, I've never played the original F-Zero.
Exactly.
It doesn't look like it aged great, but...
So, I mean, it very well may be a thing that just like, oh, maybe this is a bad idea for a racing game when you want to have the ebbs and flows and excitement of a race. But basically, if you start with your first lap in first, like, you can't not be first when you complete other laps. Like, you have to keep getting higher and higher. It sounds terrible. But for each lap completed, the player is rewarded with an approximate 4-second speed boost called the Super Jet, and a number of points determined by the place. The player can race against computer-controlled characters in 15 tracks, divided into 3 leagues. These are the Knight, Queen, and King circuits. And then there are 4 difficulties: Beginner, Standard, Expert, and Master. But F-Zero is acknowledged by critics for setting the standard for the racing genre, and the creation of its futuristic subgenre. It's also credited for reinvigorating the genre and inspiring the future creation of numerous racing games. Did you know there's a plot to F-Zero? I guess it's more like a setting, but it was described as such. Quote, F-Zero is set in the year 2560, when humanity's multiple encounters with alien life forms had resulted in the expansion of Earth's social framework. This led to commercial, technological, and cultural interchanges between planets. The multi-billionaires who earned their wealth through intergalactic trade were mainly satisfied with their lifestyles, although most coveted more entertainment in their lives. This resulted in a new entertainment based on the Formula One races, to be founded with vehicles that could hover 1 foot above the track. These Grand Prix races were soon named F-Zero, after a rise in popularity of the races. The big question, I guess, can you win the Grand Prix as either Captain Falcon, Dr. Stewart, Pico, or Samurai Goro? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with the original F-Zero?
I've seen it. That's about it. I have never played the original F-Zero at all. I haven't even played F-Zero 99, despite having installed it when it came out, because, I mean, it's free. Why not? And who knows, maybe in a month Nintendo will make it disappear. I don't know.
I was going to say, how much longer is F-Zero 99 going to even be available?
But I could tell that it was probably groundbreaking back in the day. It definitely looks better than the original Mario Kart. I will say that with full confidence. The original Super Mario Kart looks and is terrible.
But you gotta think, they were probably working on the same sort of technology at Nintendo. I mean, I'm sure F-Zero kind of begot Mario Kart in a way, and that's kind of crazy to think about. Yeah, it is pretty primitive, but you got to think of at the time what it meant to have a racing game like that on a home console. That's pretty neat. It's not one I've ever played. Like I said, the most F-Zero track experience I've had is not even like with GX. It's the Mario Kart 8 DLC, and you know what? That's okay with me. But of course, the F-Zero music has been a mainstay throughout series like Super Smash Bros. And getting remixes like that. So there's definitely some Nintendo familiarity with some of these tunes, but it's nice to kind of just go back to the original here. And that being said, Nintendo wasn't too vocal about the development of this game. What a shocker. But some interesting things I discovered were that there were 12 people listed in the credits. 2 of these are Hiroshi Yamauchi and Shigeru Miyamoto, as producers. I guess there's like only 3 programmers on the whole game. There's 2 composers. Not a lot of people came together to make this game, and yet...
That sounds about right for that time period, though, at least.
Exactly. You had people wearing multiple hats and just getting the project done. Now, we mentioned Mode 7 earlier, or at least kind of referenced it maybe at the beginning of the show, but that was the big thing with F-Zero being a launch title for Super Nintendo, and Super Nintendo having these 8 graphics modes from Mode 0 to Mode 7. And the simplest way that I saw Mode 7 described is that it's a form of texture mapping available on Super Nintendo, which allows a raster graphical plane to be rotated and scaled freely, simulating the appearance of 3D environments without processing any polygons. And so, yeah, you're able to have this kind of layer underneath everything that could be scaled and rotated and stretched to kind of give the idea of a 3D horizon without big processing power like you would on future 3D consoles. In F-Zero, the Mode 7 rendering is applied through a single layer, which is scaled and rotated around the vehicle. Shigeru Miyamoto had a couple statements on F-Zero's development, which, thanks to Shmuplations for documenting and archiving those, Miyamoto said, quote, "With F-Zero, we knew we were going to need a racing series for the new Super Famicom console. We didn't want to do a port of a pre-existing game, and in our first drafts, the screen was horizontal, and you viewed the ships from their side. During the prototype phase, we tested various ideas, getting a feel for the capabilities of the new SFC hardware as we went. Creating that solid foundation is essential for game development. It turned out that with the horizontal view for F-Zero, the perspective didn't allow us to draw 3-dimensional objects like bank curves. And without that, how could the game be interesting? On top of that, we wanted to draw player character vehicles that looked more alive and vigorous. But if we added tires to the vehicles, the required memory would be doubled. And if you added smoke from the tires during drifting, it would be even more. So because of all that, the cars became hovercrafts." He also had a quote in there that I think just kind of sums it up, and I guess his idea for making games. He says, quote, "The important thing is how the game feels in the first 2 or 3 minutes." And there you go. It's how you seize players' attention and keep them hooked.
Thank God they realized, hey, this is boring. We can't put turns in.
Right. It's just how you go back and forth and move past players somehow. F-Zero reviewed well, with a game rankings average of around 83%. Critics lauded F-Zero for its fast and challenging gameplay, the variety of tracks, and extensive use of the Mode 7 graphics mode. Criticisms include no multiplayer mode, which, yeah, I get it, and you're trying to push the capabilities and, kind of a first trial run. People were more like, yeah, in hindsight, it probably should have had multiplayer, but it's just something you didn't really think about at the time. And also just a lack of a substantial plot. I don't know how necessary that was, but it was something that people pointed out. So I get it, but at least the core gameplay is good for the time. Not really any big awards at the time, or at least noted. It was a different era of game magazines and publications, and do you really do any big awards at year's end? Even then, F-Zero was kind of middling in, top 100 games of all time lists. It was like, number 50 in 1997. So not really. But in 2009, official Nintendo magazine called the game blisteringly fast, seriously challenging, and insanely fun, ranking it 66th on a list of greatest Nintendo games. And I feel like that was the highest placement for the most contemporaneous list that you could see. Instead of like late 90s, at least it's like late aughts. That's about as good as you can get, I suppose. F-Zero sold 2.85 million copies, making it the 15th best-selling game for the platform. And it was very influential for racing games. I mean, you got to look at Mario Kart and see the Mode 7 adaptations there, and trying to recreate the same sort of thing. I don't think you'd have really this. I mean, maybe another game would have come along and figured it out, but F-Zero was the one. In fact, Toshihiro Nagoshi, president of Sega's Amusement Vision at the time in 2002, and future Yakuza creator, stated that F-Zero, quote, actually taught me what a game should be, and that it served as an influence for him to create Daytona USA and other racing games.
And then he got to go on and make his own F-Zero game.
That's right. He did have a hand there with Amusement Vision there in the early 2000s. Of course, it started an F-Zero franchise. After a Satellaview sequel in Japan, the next worldwide F-Zero sequel would be 1998's F-Zero X for Nintendo 64, really going into the third dimension there. On consoles, it would be followed by F-Zero GX, we mentioned there, it's 2003 on Nintendo GameCube. The series had Game Boy Advance installments, with or without ties to an anime there. That would be Maximum Velocity in 2001, GP Legend in 2003, and Climax in 2004. And then the series was dead. So very dead to the point where rumors of F-Zero coming back. Ooh, is it going to be a GX remaster? Or what could it be? And then without, any hesitation or just very suddenly, the free online racing video game F-Zero 99 in 2023 released through the Nintendo Switch Online subscription service. Again, to take the whole Tetris 99 multiplayers battle royale, do a big F-Zero race and try to be the last one surviving. How long is it going to be a thing? Is this just a time capsule of a podcast piece for a game that is currently existing on a subscription service? Who knows, but that's where F-Zero exists right now.
That's the worst part, is it could be either one, because Tetris 99 never went away. It's still there. But then Mario 99, or Mario, what was it? I forget how many people it was, but like 35?
I mean, it was the 35th anniversary.
I think that's what it was. I think it was 35 people because of the 35th anniversary. I don't fully remember. Point is, that game was erased from existence in March of 22. So it could go either way. And that sucks.
It was Super Mario Bros. 35. You're right. So yeah, who knows? Just putting it out there that this is how it is at the beginning of 2024. The music for F-Zero has two composers, but the main composer appears to be a woman named Yumiko Kanki. And unfortunately, she seems to be a ghost online. In fact, she's also been credited as Yumiko Kameya on the F-Zero X Guitar Arrange Edition soundtrack, meaning that Kanki may have been her maiden name. And she left Nintendo sometime before September 2006. Unfortunately, this was only discovered in the 2020 Giga Leak. So that's kind of telling how much information was actually readily out there and how it was discovered otherwise. Because Yumiko Kanki's discography involves composing music for Famicom Golf, F-Zero, Super Scope 6, Tetris and Dr. Mario, not the games separately, but the combo pack of Tetris and Dr. Mario, Star Fox 2, Special T-Shot, which was a Satellaview game that essentially got retooled into Kirby's Dream Course. So those kind of games there, and that seems to be it. Because the music for F-Zero was composed by Yumiko Kanki and Naoto Ishida. And as seemed to be the time for early Super Nintendo games, an F-Zero jazz album was released on March 25th, 1992 in Japan by Tokuma Japan Communications. It features 12 songs from the game on a single disc composed by Yumiko Kanki and Naoto Ishida, arranged by Robert Hill and Michiko Hill. The album also features Mark Russo of the Yellow Jackets on saxophones and Robin Ford on electric guitar. feel like the Yellow Jackets is a group name that sometimes comes up in different Japanese inspirations, so kind of neat to see there. All right, not too many songs out there on the F-Zero soundtrack, and yet a lot of famous tunes, so we've got a whole bunch of them here on the critical 5 tracks. How do we narrow it down to just 5, though? Let's find out and start with the first track. It's the one, of course. This is Mute City. Unless we mention otherwise, all of these tracks here are composed by Yumiko Kanki. And yeah, what a track to start out. You know, it kind of got me thinking going through all this music. We'll get to the intro title theme later. But it made me think, we've known other franchises to have like a main theme that you always identify with the franchise. And I guess if it were F-Zero, I think it's Mute City. Fitting, because Mute City 1, 2, and 3 are the starting tracks on each of the 3 circuits, so whenever you're starting a Grand Prix, you're going to hear this theme. And man, it's a good one. I think it's one of the best musically, melodically on the whole soundtrack. And yeah, what a one to hit players with right away. So good.
Yeah, I'd agree that this is, by all intents and purposes, this is the main theme of F-Zero.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only one I believe is like just in every single one. Big Blue, I think, is the other one. I think that's it, though. As far as I'm aware, like, a lot of them sound completely different in future games. But like Mute City and, like I said, as far as I'm aware, Big Blue. But like they always have the same sort of melody. And honestly, every single rendition of like Mute City and Big Blue is better than the last. And it's always neat to hear where it started out. I think it does really good use of the sound chip on the SNES in this case.
Yeah, for sure. That is a really good point, that like every remix of F-Zero songs, especially for Mute City and Big Blue too, but yeah, they just constantly get better. But it just shows that like the framework of what to work with is just so excellent. Well, we mentioned one, we might as well mention the other. So critical track number 2 for F-Zero, I think it's my favorite. It's Big Blue. I think it says something that my first exposure to Big Blue was through the Big Blue stage in Super Smash Bros. Melee, and also telling how since that stage was viewing these F-Zero cars from the side, it was almost like an envisioning of the original concept pitch for F-Zero. Never really thought about that before. But yeah, Big Blue, another solid track, and this one is composed by Naoto Ishida. It is the second track on the Night circuit, and yeah, it's a classic. I don't think it goes on too many crazy melodic runs, especially except for the like. There's that one part that has a wild run, but not as throughout as some of those runs are in Mute City. I think it's still my favorite, though. There's just something to that melody, that foundation that really gets me. They're like 1A and 1B, but I think Big Blue just edges it out for me.
I love Big Blue, mostly because of, again, much like Mute City, every rendition of it from here just sounds amazing. With the Mario Kart 8 version being the best version of this song there's ever been.
Without a doubt, yes.
And so, credit where credit is due that this is the origins of that absolute banger of an arrangement of Big Blue. And also, my first exposure to Big Blue wouldn't have been in Melee, it would have been in Brawl for me, but I like that stage and also hate that stage. I don't know how I feel about Big Blue, except the fact that I think it's really funny when you watch somebody touch the road and disappear. It's just fun. But yeah, this song is, I think, my favorite too. I think I agree. It's just an iconic theme that works extremely well for a race, honestly.
Well, let's get into more Super Smash Bros. Connections, because critical track number 3 here for F-Zero. This one is Port Town. Of course, you'd have Port Town Aerodive as a stage in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Once again, piece composed by Yumiko Kanki. But Port Town is the second track on the Queen circuit and the third track on the King circuit. So kind of spaced out differently there. It's listening to this track and thinking of like its prominence as a location and all, but the music here makes you think of, oh yeah, I can totally see why they did at least a jazz album for this. It's kind of more subdued here with like kind of the electric piano going, the little trumpet and the bass. You can kind of just hear a little, jazz quartet maybe just kind of toiling away at this. And this is, I think, a good one to do it with. Definitely a more kind of chill, subdued track, which is nice as opposed to like the kind of in your face, what the Super Nintendo could do for the time, but kind of just amped up music tracks. This is just way more chill.
It's so chill that I find it weird. I hear this and I'm like, this is F-Zero? But I mean, it's good, but it is definitely not the vibe I expect from an F-Zero track, which is not entirely a bad thing.
One that has a couple variations to it is here on number 4 for the Critical 5. This track is called White Land. Yeah, you can definitely hear how the Super Smash Bros. Remixes amplified this one. You kind of expect a more fuller sound, and it's like, oh yeah, there's still only so many tracks that the Super Nintendo had to work with, but man, that opening run is just so good. And this is technically White Land 1, composed by Yumiko Kanki. There's a White Land 2 that is like a faster variation, because White Land 1 is the 4th track on the Queen circuit, and White Land 2 is the 5th. So it's not like it's spread out across 2 circuits so they could get away with playing the same music. They wanted to, because you're playing the 2 tracks back to back, have a slight variation there. But I feel like White Land 1 is the one that stands out, especially over time and what remix artists pick for Super Smash Bros., but just what stands out more melodically and musically on the soundtrack.
Yeah, the Smash remix is all I can hear. Because it was the first version of this song I ever heard, ever. And I assume, for a good amount of people, that was the case. F-Zero was not exactly known for being its super mainstream game. But, yeah, this is good. I think I listened to Whiteland 2 before this, and I think I agree this version is better. And I think it is, like you said, telling that when they went to pick a version of it to remix in Smash, this is the one they picked. Yeah, it makes sense to me.
To round things out, how do you go about it? Well, you just finished a circuit. What plays? It might as well be critical track number 5 here for F-Zero. This is Ending. You know, when you hear certain tracks, and it's like, oh, that's where it's originally from. This piece composed by Naoto Ishida, yes, is the original melody for when you end those F-Zero courses in Mario Kart 8, and you hear that bouncy, happy little melody. This is it. Though, it says ending, so maybe it's the credits. Maybe it is after a race is complete. Hard to say, but man, it's a good track, and one I feel like that has only just kind of aged well with time, because I guess you don't really think of it as, again, an F-Zero theme. I think that's more Mute City's turf, but, you know, this is a good one, and kind of had a little eureka, aha, this is where it's originally from kind of moment.
I think this would make sense as being after a lap. I don't know if... When would they roll credits in this game? I guess at the end of a Grand Prix?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. That'd be my only guess.
I guess. But yeah. I don't remember the Mario Kart version of this, but I vaguely think I know what you're talking about. I haven't played Mario Kart 8 in a very long time. I need to start practicing it because I believe we're going to do a stream soon where we play every single track.
Oof.
Yeah, it's going to be a long stream. But, yeah, this is pretty good. It's very catchy. I'll give it that.
We got some tracks on the cutting room floor, and Joe, you have 2. Hit me with them.
Well, the first is one you made the argument for of, like, it's kind of weird that this isn't, like, considered the main theme of the series, considering it is the first track on the cutting room floor, Intro. It's the title theme. I have never heard this song before, ever. This is the most Super Nintendo song I've ever heard in my entire life.
But also sounds like it's more at home in a game like Dragon Quest.
Absolutely. This sounds like a JRPG song and not like a sci-fi racer song. It's really weird. And... you know what? I think I might know why it's not the series' main thing.
It does kind of piece it together. I just want to kind of throw it out there because, like, I'm sure other people haven't heard what the title screen theme is for F-Zero, and that's probably why.
The other track on the cutting room floor I put on here because this is just wholesale in Smash, not even a rearrangement, and it grew on me very quickly. In Smash, I really, really dig this song. This is Red Canyon. I just really dig the bass part of this song more than anything, honestly. It's so good. It's so catchy. It has such a good sense of momentum to it. Do I think it's the most impressive song in the game? No, not really. But I am glad it is in Smash so that I could hear it for the first time. Because it's really fun. I really like this song.
Kind of says something where it's like, yeah, don't mess with it. It's good as is. It has a good structure to it, and it sounds really neat. Also, some good panning going on, at least in the mix that we have here. This is the third track on the Queen circuit and the fourth on the King circuit, so a pretty good one kind of late in the game. Speaking of late in the game, for my cutting room floor tracks, how about the last track on the King circuit? It's another one that got its due in Smash, and it's called Firefield. Yeah, I feel like it's not as musically intense as some of the more intro, like the first tracks here, but you kind of have the grungy guitar undercurrent going through of just like, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. And for Firefield to get its due in, I believe it was Super Smash Bros. Brawl with that remix, that's a really good remix of it for sure. Yeah, I feel like it was just a good one to put here. It's like Firefield is a F-Zero name that really stands out, and I feel like putting it on the cutting room floor is appropriate.
I don't know. I don't think this lands quite as well. This is probably just me saying this after hearing the Smash remix, where like they actually managed to do what this song sounds like it's trying to do, which is to be a lot more intense than it is.
Yeah, like the screaming electric guitar solos in the Smash remix. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think the MIDI they use for the melody in this song is all that effective in general, but it's still a really good song overall. And yeah, I agree. It definitely fits a tense race in general.
The other track on the cutting room floor that I have is one whose title is totally opposite of what it actually sounds like. The track is called Silence. Silence actually does have some audio and music to it, and it's the last track on the Night circuit. Again, it's a theme that almost kind of sounds like it'd be more like a JRPG character theme.
Oh, that's not what I get.
What do you pick up on?
This sounds like a Kirby song.
Oh, yeah, I could get that too, for sure. But once again, like the bass line is so good, and you can definitely pick up jazzy vibes on this one for sure. I just thought it was really funny that there was a track called Silence, and that's the name of the course, and it actually has this kind of jamming tune to it.
I do like the bass part. It's a lot of fun. Very jazzy, like you said. It sounds too upbeat for an F-Zero track, though. Like, again, this sounds like a Kirby song where Kirby music is all like fun and happy and cute. And I expect F-Zero music to be tense and teeth grinding. So it's weird. It's a weird change of pace. I don't know how to feel about it.
What will I never forget about F-Zero? You know, I think the main thing is those tracks of Mute City and Big Blue and how they carry over to future iterations and references back to F-Zero. And unfortunately, how the series was dead for so long. I hope the popularity and success of F-Zero 99, the fact that it's still existing, they haven't killed it off yet, knock on wood. You know, I hope that kind of says something that F-Zero should be brought back in some way, whether you want to make that as the GX remaster next, or a new F-Zero. You can also just tell, the different homages. What was that game? There was a racing game at Switch's launch. It was from Shinen.
Fast
RMX.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, games like that, it's clear homages to F-Zero and what it can do for fast racing games. Wipeout, clearly, like that has big draws there. Racing games wouldn't be where they are without F-Zero. Again, maybe another game would have come along to really inspire that, but to have that be the push so early in 1990 is always super impressive.
Make a new one or re-release GX. That GX remaster supposedly still exists. Rumors still say.
Enough rumors are out there that I do believe that to be true, but we'll see. Maybe that will be the last gasps of the Switch and going into Switch 2 whenever that will be. All right. Well, I don't know how else we tie these two games together, but with the word mute. But Analogue, A Hate Story, and F-Zero here to start out 2024 on Original Soundchat. That will do it. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with H YouTube channel, but it's the MP3 podcast version that you want. That's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted, but you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts on catchers all around the globe, including Spotify. We do have a feed of podcast episodes there, but we also have a playlist of video game music. If we talk about a track on the show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this big playlist, but is anything being added this week?
No, Analogue is not on Spotify. I don't believe any of Isaac Schankler's stuff is on there. Again, you can go buy it on their Bandcamp page. So, if you really want it, there it is. But F-Zero is a first-party Nintendo game. That's not on anything.
Who are we kidding? Of course not. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Give us some feedback. How are we doing with these episodes? What do we miss? Also, give us some suggestions for games to talk about in the future. It is the start of a new year. There are plenty of availability options on our schedule now. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Steve London.
I hope that this time for real, I'll be talking about Emil Pagliarulo. To play us out, let's highlight a fan cover, a fan remix. Sometimes you just got to go back to the classics. And especially when I certainly associate a remix artist on YouTube with a certain song. When I think of Smooth McGroove, I think of his cover of Mute City. I don't know what it is, but it's just that good, and I feel like there's no other option for me that I could end out this episode talking about the original F-Zero with. So please enjoy that. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Ba 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 ba